George Whitley, miller at Gray's Grist Mill, graciously agreed to demonstrate the mill for us. I've sped up sections of the film. There is no sound during these sections. Other parts are loud, so you may want to turn on your captions.
We're here to talk about kerns at Gray's Grist Mill over in Westport, Massachusetts. Early on, the Europeans, when they came over, discovered corn. It was given to them. The Pilgrims were the first to receive it. And we grind descendants of that corn here. And they brought over with them what's called a kern, which was a hand grinder. And this was the European style of grinding at the time. It wasn't mortar and pestle. You know, if you were well off, a family had this. And this type of grinding involved two stones put together with a pivot point. Using your force differently, more efficiently, you could grind a lot more corn a lot better. And I talk about corn because that's what I grind. So we have a dress pattern. The corn is going to pass through the side of the eye here. The eye here in this case is held onto the spindle. But all millstones work like this. Whatever you're grinding goes in the top. Up here it's called a hopper. Over there we have one. Oh, no, we're not over there. You fill it with corn. You turn the handle. In this case, it always comes off. But what you're going to do is rotate it like that. And the corn is going to fall through. It'll lift the stone up a little bit, and it'll start coming out the sides brown. Okay, this is Rhode Island White Cat Plate corn. Eight-row corn. This particular one has a diamond pattern on one of the 8 rows of it, and it's supposed to be Narragansett, had that tendency towards that corn having that pattern. The Wampanoags was slightly tanner. The Pequods was about the same color, didn't have the pattern, slightly smaller in kernel size. So those are the lies I'm telling today. With corn. So here's what I know. So we're going to feed it in. Now this is a little different than a larger millstone. A larger millstone, the corn drops through the center of the stone. Here we have it off center. And I'm going to turn it, try not to get hurt. You can hear it, it's lifting up a little bit. The reason it's lifting up is this size stone is not really large enough to grind very hard corn like this. So it's going to lift up. It's going to start to come out. You're going to have full kernels come out the side. Again, it'd be kids' work. The miller moved up into something else, a much bigger piece of machine. So it's coming out. And what you're going to see is very hard, very gritty, and it's going to run through 5 or 6 more times to get broken down to what I'd be doing with the larger equipment. So you feed it back through and just keep grinding.
2 ears worth of corn kernels added. 8 times speed. At the coarseness of very rough grits at this point.
Yeah, it's not flouring yet. And flouring, you'll know what I mean by that. It'll be like a light dusting of flour. It starts to show all the way around the edge, but you got to keep feeding this stuff through. Like now, the grits are smaller, but they're still very big grits. Like you wouldn't buy that as grits at a store anywhere.
Right.
And it's much bigger than what you'd buy.
The average 5 to 7-year-old would grind corn for 3 to 4 hours per day, just for their own home. They might grind for longer or share the job with their siblings to have cornmeal that they could sell. From a very young age, children were expected to contribute to the household economically. The top stone weighs 55 pounds. The bottom stone weighs 110 pounds. Notice how the grindings are starting to come out of the sides more smoothly? Maybe halfway done with 2 ears of corn after all this time. Now for the large millstones. They are encased in the white cylinder in the next shot. The setup is long, so parts are at 4 times speed. The arrows are pointing at a part called the shoe. It gradually adds corn into the center of the millstones. The miller is putting in a part called the damsel. It clicks in the background as long as everything is working smoothly. This is the hopper. It can hold several bags of corn at once. It feeds the shoe. In an emergency, you could dump the shoe to jam up the millstones with corn kernels. However, it could cause serious damage to the equipment, so it's a last resort. Corn is poured into the hopper, where it drops into the shoe. The silver machine in front of us is a mechanical sifter. A screen goes over the top. It shakes the flour into a bin underneath and keeps out the corn's shells or chaff. The goal is to turn the stones fast enough to grind the corn finely without making so much friction heat that it cooks the corn. This is what I leaned down to look at, but it was not moving yet. The rhythmic clicking in the background is the damsel. Most of the metal here is from the original mill. Much of the wood is from when the mill was rebuilt after a fire. This chute lets you dump the chaff into a separate container. Chaff is very good for gardening. Mulching with it prevents weeds and it fertilizes the soil if you turn it in at the end of the year. The screw he's holding controls how close together the 2 stones are. Before we start grinding, we have to separate the stones. If we don't separate them to let them build up speed first, a belt would fall off of its wheel underneath. The millstones wouldn't turn. You can actually hear when the stones separate because of how much pressure there is. George is explaining that the millstones are tilted. That helps the cornmeal fall into the sifter. It also makes milling a little harder. I feel the chafe here. It's very fluffy. The mill at work. George makes adjustments to how close the stones are once he sees how the cornmeal is coming out. If the meal is too coarse, he moves the stones together. If it is too fine, he will move them apart. If you look closely, you can see the damsel turning. It is a square, so it clicks when it turns. The millstones inside have the same grooved pattern or dress pattern as the kern, just bigger. The mill used to be run exclusively by water, then a truck engine. Now it is electric. Every so often, George taps the sides of the sifter so that cornmeal doesn't get stuck. When he makes a fist while holding cornmeal, it should clump a little bit, but not too much. For every 100 pounds of corn kernels, George gets about 90 pounds of cornmeal. The biggest factor that changes that is humidity. When it's humid, the millstones don't grind as smoothly, so he gets less per pound. Thank you, George. You can visit the mill Tuesdays through Sundays from 2 to 4 p.m. You can also visit graysgristmill.com to support his work.